Yeah, welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today. Going to talk Kenny Smith and the NBA champion in Houston Rockets, and of course, Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls. Should be a pretty interesting discussion. But before we get to that, if you haven't already, you know what time it is. If you're here on YouTube, go ahead, click that subscribe, that like, and that notification bell so you can be kept up to date whenever we drop new content. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, open your audio podcast platform, click the search bar, and type in the Format Podcast. We should come up. You go ahead, subscribe right there. If you enjoy the channel, please give us that like, that thumbs up, whatever it is, or most certainly that 5-star review. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. Finally, make sure you share the pod. Don't keep it to yourself if you enjoy the out-of-the-box thinking and you know some other sports fans that might like it as well. So, earlier this week, Stephen A. Smith of ESPN First Take fame, he had his No Mercy podcast, which is actually a pretty decent show. I think it comes out like 3 times a week. And I was listening to it, and it was really interesting because his guest was Kenny the Jet Smith, 2-time NBA champion with the 93, 94, and then 94, 95 Houston Rockets. And of course, one of the hosts on the Emmy Award-winning TNT basketball show Inside the NBA. So they talked about a bunch of different things. They talked about Kenny Smith's new book. I'm definitely going to check that out when I get a chance. But what really kind of got me and inspired me to do this show today was Stephen A. Smith asked Kenny Smith about his thoughts on whether or not his back-to-back Rockets championship teams would have been able to beat the Bulls if Michael Jordan hadn't taken those 2 years off. Because a lot of times what we hear is, Olajuwon and the Rockets only got those 2 rings because Jordan wasn't there. Now, that's an interesting thought. And a lot of times, I guess you don't want to malign the way that someone won a championship, but context and who you beat does matter. But at the end of the day, history will remember that the Rockets have 2 championship rings. But before we go ahead and get into the breakdown, let's just listen to what Kenny Smith had to say to Stephen A. about that.
Is it true that you actually think that you and Olajuwon and the crew would have beaten the Chicago Bulls in the finals if Jordan was there and had it retired? Are you telling me that team would have beat Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls?
First of all, yes, we would have beat the Chicago Bulls, I feel. But I'm glad we didn't play them because it would have hurt Michael's legacy in this debate of LeBron.
I don't think it would have, because I think he would have beat y'all, Kenny. I don't think y'all would have beat Chicago.
Can I ask you, so you really believe they would have won 8 championships?
No, I really believe they would have beat y'all.
No, 8 champ. That means they would have won 8 in a row. I don't think that. Okay. Secondly, the reason I felt that we would have beat them, not because Michael wasn't the greatest player ever.
Olajuwon was no joke. He was something special.
But they were too small for us. Because remember, there was no Horace Grant. Remember, he was in Orlando. That was when all the contract stuff. Dennis Rodman wasn't there yet. He wasn't there.
Got you.
So who's going to guard Dream? No, that impossible. It would have been an impossible task for them to guard Dream, and because he was getting easy buckets. That's in the era when 3-point shooting was just starting to come around. No way, no how. We would have beaten the Michael Jordan Bulls because they were too little.
You had Olajuwon, you had Thorpe, you had yourself,
and think about
Ori.
They did. And Michael was there one year. He was wearing number 45, and nobody was complaining when he had 55 at the Garden. The reason they lost to the Orlando Magic, who by the way, we swept.
Yes, you did.
We swept because they were too little. Mm-hmm. They were too little.
That's a good point. I will say this to you. When I think about Jordan, I think about the team he won the 3 titles with. Right. And then the 3 he won the second 3 titles with.
We might not have beaten those teams.
In fairness to you, that's the teams I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, all right, Horace Grant is going, Rodman's not there yet. Y'all are too small. I got you there. I understand
there
that.
You go.
I'm thinking about the 3-peat, the first 3-peat squad, and the second 3-peat squad. I think both of those squads would have beat y'all.
Well, that would be debatable, and I would say my competitive spirit would say no. But my logical mind would be like, that makes sense. But them teams that was there and just Michael, we would have smacked them up. We'd have smacked them.
So I thought this was pretty interesting. And I thought it was pretty interesting for a few reasons, right? Now, if you're not new to the channel and you've been here with me for a while, you know that Hakeem Olajuwon is my absolute favorite NBA player of all time. I think that he is one of the absolute greatest. I have him number 5 on my all-time list. Again, I'm sure that's pretty high for a lot of people, but I also believe that he's one of the most criminally undervalued and disrespected all-time greats, right? Maybe him and Duncan, because, obvious reasons. If you're quiet, you're not outgoing, and you're a certain type of player, even though you dominate, maybe you don't get as much of the fanfare, right? And of course, something else I mentioned, Hakeem Olajuwon, is obviously he's not an American. And so that right there automatically creates, with most American fans, a kind of a gap that you have to bridge as a player, right? So anyway, part of the reason I think that those two teams were incredible is because of Dream's absolute brilliance across those 2 seasons. The 94 playoff run was, sorry, LeBron fans, you're going to get mad. Jordan fans, you're going to get mad too. But the 94 playoff run was the greatest. And actually, that season was the single greatest season by any player in NBA history, in my estimation. And I'm going to tell you why. It's pretty much inarguable once you hear all the facts on it, right? So obviously, Dream was an all-star starter that year. He was first-team All-NBA that year. He was NBA MVP that year. He was Defensive Player of the Year that year. He is also the Finals MVP that year. But it doesn't stop there. He is also the only player in NBA history to lead a team in all major statistical categories through an entire playoff run, resulting in a championship. The LeBron fans were getting ready to jump up there, right? Because he's consistently led his teams in the major categories across playoff runs, but he's never done it and won a championship. Yes, the winning has to matter. I know that to LeBron fans, winning and losing is not important, but the winning has to matter. Anyway, Dream is the only player in NBA history who's ever done that and then won the championship. And as I mentioned, he was also Finals MVP, right? So you're talking about complete and total dominance across the course of an entire season. And besides that, not just leading his team in all the categories through a playoff run, Olajuwon also has the largest gap between first and second leading scorers on a playoff team winning a championship, right? So what does all that say? That says when we talk about carrying a team, no one has ever carried a team to a championship to the extent that Hakeem Olajuwon did during the 93-94 season. Now, a lot of times people say, well, he only won because Michael Jordan wasn't there. And maybe you argue that, right? But as Kenny Smith said, if you believe that, then you also have to believe that Michael Jordan would have won 8 straight championships. And I'm not sure that that's the case. As great as he was, I'm not sure that he would have won. Now, the empirical evidence says that there's nothing to prove that Michael Jordan could have ever lost in the finals because it simply never happened, nor did he ever reach a game 7. Hakeem Olajuwon, before 93, had already lost in the finals in 1986 against one of the greatest teams of all time in those Celtics, right? The Boston Celtics, when they being the Houston Rockets, upset the Los Angeles Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, right? So we know Dream could have lost in the finals. They lost in 6 that year. He didn't get back for another 8 years, right? He got back in 93, 94. So we know for a fact that Dream could lose in the finals. We do not know that Michael Jordan could lose in the finals because it never happened and he never reached a game 7. So the empirical evidence says you got to put your money on the Bulls in that case. But I think Kenny Smith, he made a very interesting point. He says, that team was too small. Now, the 93-94 Bulls had Horace Grant, but the 94-95 Bulls did not. So that was prior to getting Dennis Rodman, who arrived in 96. So Kenny Smith says he makes the point that those Bulls teams were too small, and maybe even with Horace Grant, because as good as Horace Grant was as a defender and a rebounder, he probably gets neutralized by Otis Thorpe on that 93-94 Rocket squad, right? So he gets neutralized. They have nothing they can do with Dream. And of course, you have Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen probably matches up with Robert Horry, or, maybe they use some type of rotating matchup, they being the Bulls, in terms of what Scottie Pippen does to disrupt the rest of the offense for the Rockets, like your Mario Ellies and your Kenny Smiths and all that. I think it would be a compelling matchup. I was talking to my boy about this, and he made a pretty good point, saying it's not as if the Bulls weren't used to facing big men. Like, they faced Alonzo Mourning in the East, and they beat the Hornets. And they faced Patrick Ewing regularly in the East, and they beat the Knicks. And they faced the Pacers in the East and, dealt with Rick Smith. So it's not that they weren't used to facing big men, and some really good ones at that. But I do think during that 93-94 season, as I mentioned, and then following up 94-95, that Dream played at levels that, Dream being Hakeem Olajuwon, that the Bulls had never faced in a big man before. And then the Rockets, the rest of their supporting cast was also playing in a way that's en vogue now, but was well ahead of its time in terms of the three ball. They were bombing away from three. Mario Elie, Mad Max, Vernon Maxwell, Kenny the Jet Smith, Matt Bullard, Big Shot Bob, Robert Horry, all these guys were shooting threes. So it's like you try to double team Olajuwon and they can get you with the three. So it's really an interesting proposition. I've also heard Robert Horry say that he believes that those Rockets would have beaten the Bulls, and I don't necessarily chalk that up to just, you know, the pride of them being champions with the Rockets, because Horry won 5 more championships in other places, right? He won championships with the Bulls. He won championships with the Spurs. So he kind of has seen a lot of different things, and not the Bulls, I'm sorry. Horry won championships with the Lakers, and he won championships with the Spurs. So he's seen different things. He's been different places. He's won with different types of coaches. He knows, you know, what it may take. So I'm not going to say I necessarily go 100% with him and say that I agree. I think it would have been a fantastic series. Maybe for the first time we see the Bulls push to 7, but Michael Jordan's greatness overall, I think, would carry the day. Again, the thought of 8 straight titles, maybe they lose somewhere else down the road just as a result of the championship fatigue, all those runs to the championship, who knows? But I really do think it would be a really interesting proposition. It's hard to bet against Mike, but at the same time, with the level that Dream was playing, it's hard to bet against him as well. We saw him absolutely decimate David Robinson in the 94-95 season. David Robinson, newly crowned MVP, and Hakeem Olajuwon destroying him to a level that we've never seen 2 players of that level go at before, and a player of that level get dominated for an entire series, not one game. We saw Olajuwon just completely destroy him to the tune of 35 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 blocks throughout that series. And, you know, some of Olajuwon's greatest highlights of his career come with him just pulling new moves out against David Robinson, you know, just taking the Dream Shake to a whole nother level. And all of that stuff is kind of what pushed and propelled Dream into, and not only pushed and propelled Dream into where he kind of got into the top 10 at his retirement for most people, right? Now, it's not only that, of course, you have the statistical accomplishment across his career, but to hear Kenny Smith say that, I thought was really interesting, especially for the fact that he went to North Carolina and played with Michael Jordan. Now, of course, he played against him in practice often, but he roomed with him when he was a freshman and Michael Jordan was a junior. He roomed with him on away road trips, so he knows Michael Jordan intimately well. And so for him to say, you know, we'd have smacked them, I thought was very interesting. Another quick note is that if you look for Mad Max, I can't remember what podcast it was on. Maybe it was the Knuckleheads or All the Smoke. Mad Max was also talking about his time there in Houston, Vernon Maxwell, and winning championships and would they have been able to beat the Bulls. And Robert Horry mentions this as well. During that stretch, I want to say from between like 92 to 95, but even with Jordan, they won like 6 out of 8 games or beat them like 6 times in a row or something to that effect. So they played really well and seemed to have matched up extremely well against Olajuwon and those Rockets. And Michael Jordan was also quoted, I'm not going to give the exact quote, I don't have it in front of me, as saying something along the lines of, you know, I'm glad we never had to go up against the Rockets. We didn't have any answer for the big Nigerian, or, you know, something along those lines. So Michael Jordan, who also, while I'm not going to laud him as a talent evaluator, has also on his own personal starting 5, he picks Olajuwon as the center. So that shows the tremendous amount of respect, I won't say fear, but respect that he has for Olajuwon as a player and what Dream could do. So I thought it was really interesting. I liked hearing Kenny Smith talk about it. And I like the bravado as a competitor and as a champion to say, yeah, we would have smacked them. They were too small and they had no answer for Dream, which they didn't. You know, Dream would have eaten up whoever they put on him. So definitely interesting to think about. What I want to know from you, do you think that the Bulls could have won 8 straight championships had Michael Jordan not retired? Do you think that the Bulls would have beaten the 93, 94, and 94-95 Houston Rockets en route to 2 more titles in Michael Jordan and the Bulls' illustrious career? All right, looking forward to your comments. Leave those in the comments section. And I'll be back with you next episode. And I'm out. Peace.